I heard this story from my friend Jake, and although it seems absolutely unbelievable, I can't help but share it with you. Maybe everything you're about to hear is just a fabrication, but who knows? What if it's really true? What if the dark forest hides more than we can imagine? The forest had always been a place where Jack felt the most at peace. Like most people, he lived in a large city, but every weekend he would escape the noise and bustle. The forest was his refuge, a place where he could recharge, connect with nature, and forget about all his problems. Jack often walked through the forests on the outskirts of his home, especially after tough work weeks. However, this time, when he went to the forest, something felt different. The day was gloomy, the sky was covered with heavy clouds, and the wind brought with it a chill. The forest seemed unusually quiet. Normally, at this time of year, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves could be heard, but today there was only silence. Jack felt as though each step he took echoed in the emptiness, and the forest, once peaceful, now felt strangely cold and oppressive. He stopped at a small clearing among the trees, which had once been his favorite resting spot. But this time, it looked entirely different. The trees were darker, their branches heavy with dry leaves, and there were no birds singing anywhere. Jack felt a slight unease, but decided to continue walking, believing it was just the weather affecting his perception. After a few minutes, he noticed something strange. From the main path, a narrow trail led off into the dense bushes, one he had never seen before. At first, Jack thought it might be an old forest path, but something about it made him curious about what lay at the end. He decided to follow it. The path was covered with moss, and in some places, as Jack stepped, he could feel his feet sink into the ground. The forest grew thicker, the trees seemed to close in around him, blocking his way. With each step it became heavier, and soon he started noticing strange shadows moving among the trees, with no clear shape. At first he thought they were just shadows from the branches, but when they reappeared he realized they were something else. Finally, Jack emerged at a small, gloomy lake. Its waters were dark, tinged with yellow, and looked as though they had never been touched by the sun. On the shore stood an old stone bridge, almost entirely covered with moss, and near it was a small forest cabin. It seemed abandoned, but one strange impression unsettled Jack. The windows were all dark except for one, which seemed slightly open. What made him approach the cabin, Jack could not explain. He took just one step and found himself at the door. He cautiously turned the handle, and the door creaked open. Inside was dark, filled with the stale air and the scent of old wooden panels. Only one lantern hanging from the ceiling barely illuminated the room. In the corner stood an old table, covered with books, tools, and many other items that looked as though they hadn't been touched in years. Jack peered at the shelf. One book caught his eye. It was old, with worn covers, and on its spine he saw a strange symbol, a design resembling intertwined letters. He picked it up, flipped it open, and the first page sent a chill down his spine. In this forest there is no time, and nothing is what it seems. Jack felt the cold spread across his body. He placed the book back on the shelf and stepped back toward the door, but as soon as he started to leave, a sharp cold pierced his skin, and the door slammed shut. The forest around him had become utterly silent, but in the air there was a sense of impending dread. Not knowing how to escape, Jack turned back to the lake, hoping to find some way back. But the lake seemed much larger now, and the water began to ripple, as if something was moving in it. Jack couldn't understand what was happening, but he felt his heart racing. From behind a tree, a silhouette emerged. At first it was just a shadow, but as it drew closer, Jack realized it was a figure of a woman in white clothes. Her face was blurred, as if distant from reality. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered quietly, but her voice sounded like it came from deep within the earth. "You have crossed the boundary." Jack felt a surge of fear, but there was nowhere to run. She stepped closer and her face began to become clearer, and he saw something terrifying in her eyes. The shadows surrounding her grew more intense, and Jack realized she wasn't just a woman. "You won't leave here alive," she said, and her voice held no emotion, only a cold foreboding of something that had already occurred. Meanwhile, the forest around them began to change. It closed in, the trees growing even taller, and the light dimmed further. Jack began to understand. He hadn't just gotten lost. He had become part of something that existed beyond time and reality. The shadow approached, and with every step, Jack felt his consciousness constricting, as if his soul was being swallowed by the forest that had no end. In today's video, I will share another story I heard from my friend. In a dense forest where trees seemed endless and fog blanketed the ground, there was an abandoned campsite. This place had long been neglected, and even the locals avoided mentioning it. However, for Jack, a young man seeking respite from the city's clamor, this spot appeared perfect. He had always dreamed of solitude and decided to spend a few days in the forest to clear his mind and reassess his life. What was intended as a simple retreat soon transformed into a nightmare, making him question the wisdom of his choice. Jack had a deep-seated love for outdoor adventures, cultivated since childhood. He wasn't intimidated by forests and considered himself knowledgeable enough to navigate even the most obscure paths. Equipped with only essentials, a tent, sleeping bag, food, and survival tools, he ventured into the woods. The forest greeted him with an unsettling silence. The usual chorus of birds was conspicuously absent. This silence, heavy and profound, gnawed at him, but he dismissed it as fatigue from his journey. As night descended, the forest transformed. The once familiar sounds were replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. Jack noticed the absence of nocturnal birds, a peculiar anomaly he chose to overlook. Settling by his campfire, he tried to relax, but an inexplicable unease lingered in the air. Suddenly, Jack was jolted awake by a distinct noise, a rustling too deliberate to be attributed to animals. Peering out from his tent, he saw nothing but the dense fog enveloping the ground. The silence was suffocating, and every gust of wind seemed to carry an unseen presence. Approaching the campfire, Jack was startled to find a large black feather on the ground. It was unlike any he had seen before, too large to belong to any local bird. Before he could ponder its origin, he heard the noise again, closer this time. Turning, he glimpsed a shadow, a dark, formless presence moving among the trees. It lacked a distinct shape but exuded a palpable, oppressive energy. Panic surged through Jack as he scrambled to gather his belongings. His limbs felt heavy, his heart raced, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to close in around him. He fled into the forest, the path obscured by fog and twisted branches. With each step, the sensation of being pursued intensified, as if the very forest conspired against him. After what felt like an eternity, Jack stumbled upon a massive tree marked with strange notches. Collapsing beside it, he tried to steady his breath. Suddenly, the rustling returned, now directly in front of him. The shadow materialized, a dark, shifting form that seemed to breathe, its presence chilling him to the core. He couldn't move, rooted by fear and exhaustion. Just as the shadow loomed over him, Jack awoke with a start. His heart pounded in his chest and sweat drenched his brow. It had all been a nightmare, or so he thought. Rising from his tent, he froze. The tree with the notches stood before him, its markings unmistakable. The feather lay nearby, and the air was thick with the same oppressive silence. Had it all been a dream, or was something far more sinister at play in the depths of the forest?